Sometimes people lose things that are very important to them and then they get very worried. So if ever you find something that somebody's lost, I'm sure they'd be ever so grateful if you gave it back to them. This story is called Lost Property. It was a Monday and the first day of the half-term holiday when Roger knocked on the front door of the doctor's house. He had been counting all the money in his piggy bank. He had saved so much that he thought it was time he treated himself. He was going to buy some toffees. His mother had told him they wouldn't be good for his teeth and that he would have to brush them very hard afterwards, but he still wanted very badly to get some. "Mum, can I go to the village shop with Roger to get some sweets?" Jimmy shouted out to Ruth. "Okay, but be careful of the traffic in the lane and don't forget to look left and right before crossing the road," she instructed. Jimmy had heard this so many times that he now did these things automatically. Ruth need never have worried. Jimmy then reminded his mother that he hadn't been given his pocket money for the week, so she went to get her purse. She found a 20p coin and gave it to Jimmy. He also had plans to buy some sweets. It was a warm, sunny day, so both boys just had t-shirts and short trousers on. They were also wearing their trainers and felt very skippy. So, as soon as they were out of the house, they both started to run as fast as they could. It was a race. Roger usually won because he was older than Jimmy, but sometimes he got puffed out and Jimmy would catch up. "Phew! I'm getting hot," Roger said as he came to a stop. "I wish we had brought a bottle of drink with us." "Maybe we could get one in the village shop," Jimmy suggested. "Don't think we've got enough money for that and sweets as well," Roger replied. "But maybe Jenny will give us a drink of water from her kitchen." Jenny was the lady who ran the village shop and its little post office. She was always very kind to children, sometimes giving them a sweet even if they didn't have any money. The boys continued down Drover's Lane and were not far from the village when they saw a mobility scooter some way in front of them. Now, a mobility scooter is a kind of chair on wheels that has its own battery-driven motor. It is a very useful kind of transport for people who have difficulty in walking. Lots of old people use them. "It looks like it stopped," Roger commented. There were no houses along this part of the lane, so the boys wondered if there might be some kind of problem. There was a problem. When they got to the mobility scooter, they found it was Mrs. Davis sitting in it. Seeing the boys, she suddenly looked very relieved. "Oh, thank heaven! I've been waiting for someone to come along. I'm stuck. I've tried everything, but I just can't get the motor to work." "Hold on, Mrs. Davis," Roger encouraged. "We'll try and move you." Then Roger and Jimmy went to the back of the scooter and started to push. They pushed and pushed, but the scooter would not move. "Have you got the brakes on, Mrs. Davis?" Jimmy cried out. "Oh, dear me, so I have," Mrs. Davis admitted. She released the brakes, and the boys began to push again. But the scooter hardly moved. "I think we're going to need some help," Jimmy conceded. "Please wait here, and we'll see if we can get some." Well, of course, Mrs. Davis had no choice but to wait, as the boys ran off to find some strong people. It didn't take them long. They found two men digging a hole in the road. They had yellow helmets on and were doing something to the drains. Roger and Jimmy approached them. It was Jimmy who spoke. "Please, sir, can you help us move an old lady? She is stuck in her special scooter chair and it won't move." Both men looked at each other, looking rather puzzled. They really wanted to keep on digging their hole, but seeing that Jimmy looked desperate, they finally decided to go and help. "Oh, how kind of you," Mrs. Davis said to the two workmen as she saw them approaching. "Don't worry, dear, we'll soon have you moving again," the shorter of the two men encouraged. He may not have been very tall, but he was certainly very strong. It was probably all that digging of holes that he did. Both men began to wiggle and partly lift the mobility scooter with Mrs. Davis still in it. Soon it began to move. "Where to, madam?" the taller workman asked. Mrs. Davis gave them directions. It wasn't very far, and soon Mrs. Davis was being pushed through her front gate and up to her front door. She was so grateful. She asked the workmen if they would like a nice cup of tea. "Prefer a cold drink. Hot work, you know," the shorter workman replied. Mrs. Davis gave them iced orange drinks from her refrigerator and 2 large pieces of cake. Jimmy and Roger were given glasses of orange as well. When they had finished, the 2 workmen got up to leave, but before they left, the taller one decided to check the mobility scooter. After about a minute, he began to chuckle. "No juice," he declared. "The battery's dead. It needs recharging. When did you last plug it into the electricity, madam?" Mrs. Davis thought a while. "Oh, dear," she sighed. "I just can't remember. I'm afraid I'm very forgetful. I just don't remember things." The 2 workmen then got hold of the scooter again, this time positioning it next to a wall where they plugged it into an electricity socket. "It's recharging now. Leave it for 2 or 3 hours and you'll be able to use it again," they advised. "Oh, you gentlemen are so kind for rescuing me," Mrs. Davis said to the workmen. "Our pleasure, madam," they both replied, looking very proud of what they had done for her. After the workmen left, Jimmy and Roger were also about to go when Mrs. Davis said, "Wait a minute, boys, I've got something for you." She wanted to give them 50p for all the help they had been. "Can you hand me my bag from the sideboard, please?" she asked. Jimmy fetched it and gave it to her. Mrs. Davis opened it and started to look inside. She looked for some while, repeatedly checking. "Where's my purse?" she muttered, looking rather worried. "I had it with me when I went to the village shop. That's where I'd just been when you found me stuck in the lane." Mrs. Davis began to search around the room. Jimmy and Roger helped, even moving 2 sleepy cats that were curled up on a sofa. The purse was nowhere to be found. "Oh dear, what am I going to do?" Mrs. Davis looked as if she was going to cry. "My purse had all my money, my credit card and my banker's card in it. Now I won't be able to do any shopping." Jimmy and Roger looked at each other, wondering what to do. They really hoped Mrs. Davis wouldn't cry, because they thought it was only children that did that sort of thing. Then Jimmy had an idea. "Maybe you left it in the shop or dropped it somewhere. Don't worry, Mrs. Davis, because we're going to the shop anyway. We'll go and see if we can find your purse for you." Mrs. Davis was very grateful and thanked the boys as they made their way to the door and then into the lane. Instead of running, this time they walked. Indeed, they walked very slowly because they were looking at the ground and the spaces between fences and hedges in search of the missing purse. They were out of luck. Finally, they arrived at the village shop. "Did Mrs. Davis leave her purse here?" Jimmy asked Jenny, who was arranging bottles of jam on a shelf. "No, my dears," she said, "but we'll take a look around the shop to see if she dropped it." Jenny and the boys started to look. They looked on shelves, in corners, and even behind the shop counter, but the purse wasn't there. Jimmy and Roger were very disappointed. They were so disappointed that they forgot all about buying their sweets. On their way back to Mrs. Davis' cottage, they began to wonder what Mrs. Davis would do if she didn't have any money. Wide-eyed, Roger suddenly realized, if she can't go shopping, she won't have any food. Jimmy thought about it too. "She's going to starve," he blurted out, "and her 2 cats too." "I don't know about the cats," Roger replied. "They'll just have to go out and catch some mice, but I think something's got to be done about Mrs. Davis." The boys began to hatch a plan. They would go home and make some sandwiches, get biscuits, and see if there was any spare cake they could lay their hands on. When they'd done this, they would give it all to Mrs. Davis. She would also need some milk and tea bags. Later that day, Jimmy and Roger were once again outside Mrs. Davis' cottage. "We thought you might need these," they said, handing her a large bag when she came to the door. The bag had the sandwiches they had made, plus all the other food they had been able to find. There were even 2 cans of meat for the cats. Mrs. Davis just didn't know what to say. She was quite overwhelmed by what the boys had done. The boys didn't stay long, because it looked as if Mrs. Davis was about to get emotional again, and they didn't want to see her crying. "You know," Roger reflected, "that food isn't going to last long. What Mrs. Davis really needs is some money. Maybe we should try and get her some." "How are we going to do that?" Jimmy asked. "We can't take it from anyone. That would be stealing." Roger thought about it and then stated very firmly, "We're going to have to go to work. We'll have to find jobs to do and get paid money." Jimmy had never had a job and wondered what they could do. Roger already had a solution. "We'll knock on people's doors and see if they have anything we can do for them." Jimmy thought this was a good idea. After all, it was half-term, and they didn't have anything else to do except play in the garden. Next day, both boys got up very early and rushed through their breakfasts before setting off for the village. They knocked on the doors and rang the bells of people they knew, or whom their parents knew, and each time they would say something like, "Please, do you have a job for us to do? We need to get some money for Mrs. Davis because she lost her purse and hasn't any money to do her shopping. We've made her sandwiches, but they won't last long." Of course, people were very concerned for Mrs. Davis, and the boys soon found lots of jobs to do. Over the next few days, they tidied gardens, did shopping, took pets for walks, did the washing up, simple cleaning, and a few other things besides. For this they were usually paid 50p. Some people even gave them money without asking them to do any jobs at all. Soon everybody in the village was talking about poor Mrs. Davis. They were so worried about her living on her own without any money to feed herself that they began to do things for her. Mrs. Pollock made a beautiful fish pie. Mr. Jackson went into his garden and dug up some carrots and potatoes. Mrs. Baker collected eggs from the chickens that roamed in her orchard. Mrs. Roberts bought a loaf of bread and some butter, and there were a few other things besides which people all secretly left on Mrs. Davis's doorstep. Mrs. Davis became very confused. Every time she opened her front door, there was something on the doorstep waiting for her, and she never knew where it had come from. Something else happened, and it was quite serious. When Jimmy and Roger told people Mrs. Davis' purse had gone missing, some of them began to wonder if a thief or a robber had taken it. Very soon, everyone began to think there was a criminal in the village stealing things. So the villagers made sure all doors were locked and windows shut tight, even though these were warm days and they would get very hot. In cottages and houses, extra precautions were taken. Valuables were collected and put into secret places. They were hidden under beds, in flower pots, saucepans, or anywhere a burglar might not think to look. Nobody felt safe any more. They even wrote to the chief constable, complaining that they never saw a policeman in the village, and they wanted to know what he was going to do about it. The chief constable did send a detective to the village. He went round all the cottages asking if they had anything stolen or if they had seen any strangers that looked suspicious. The detective couldn't find any evidence that crimes were being committed, although Mrs. Pollock claimed that a pair of knickers had been stolen from her washing line. She found out a few days later that they had been blown into the next garden by a strong gust of wind. After all the jobs they had done, Jimmy and Roger counted all the money they had earned. It came to £6.25. They thought it was an enormous amount, and that it would allow Mrs. Davis to do her shopping for weeks and weeks and weeks. They put the money in a little plastic bag and then set off to visit Mrs. Davis. When they got to Mrs. Davis' cottage, they were surprised to see a big green car outside. It looked very new and shiny. If Mrs. Davis had visitors, Jimmy and Roger wondered if now was the right time to see her. But just as they were turning to go home, Mrs. Davis' front door opened. A lady they had never seen before stepped out into the garden. She seemed surprised to see the boys. "Is there anything I can do for you?" she asked. Jimmy and Roger didn't know what to say. The lady looked very important. She was very smartly dressed and looked like she was very busy. Roger finally plucked up courage. "We've come to give Mrs. Davis her money," he explained. The lady was confused and then remembered something. "Oh, have you found Mum's purse?" Roger said no, only then to realize that the smart lady was Mrs. Davis' daughter. "Well then," the lady continued, "what is the money for?" Jimmy and Roger began to explain all that had happened. When they had finished, the lady gave a little laugh. "Ha ha! So that explains it," she said, looking very relieved. "Mum couldn't understand where all the presents were coming from whenever she opened the front door, and you're the sweet little boys who started it all off." She gave them both a little pat on the head. Jimmy and Roger weren't too sure about being called sweet little boys. Calling somebody sweet was something they thought better applied to girls or babies. Then Jimmy remembered he hadn't given Mrs. Davis the £6.25. "Would you please give this to Mrs. Davis?" he asked, handing over the small plastic bag he had been clutching tightly. "What's this?" the lady asked. "It's money from the jobs we've been doing," Roger explained. "We thought Mrs. Davis would need it for her shopping." The lady just stood there, not knowing what to do, but then suddenly gathered both boys together in her arms and kissed each on their foreheads. She held them very tightly. Jimmy wasn't sure if they had made the lady happy, because suddenly there appeared to be tears in her eyes. Neither boy wanted to see another grown-up crying, and neither of them felt like risking another kiss, so they quickly made their excuses to go home. "What's your names?" the lady shouted after them. "I'm Jimmy Jones, and this is Roger," Jimmy shouted back. "I'm Fenella," the lady added. But by this time the boys could not hear her. They had disappeared around the corner of the lane. That evening Ruth asked her husband if he had been eating extra cake or biscuits. She also wanted to know where some of their cats' tinned food had gone. Monty only had one can left, and she was sure there had been more of them. Half a loaf of bread was also missing, together with a block of butter. "Something funny is going on here," she muttered, "and I bet our Jimmy is behind it all." Ruth asked Jimmy if he had been taking food, and if he had, what had he been doing with it. Jimmy felt very embarrassed. He had hoped it would all be secret, but now he had to explain everything. Ruth didn't know whether to be cross or very proud of what Jimmy and Roger had done. In the end, she decided the boys had done a wonderful thing. "That was truly marvellous, Jimmy, but you shouldn't take things without telling Dad and me. You know, we might even have been able to help." Jimmy felt relieved he had not got into trouble, although that is what he thought, until there was a knock on the door the following day. Jimmy opened it and was surprised to see Fenella. Ruth came to the door too. "I'm Fenella, Mrs. Davis' daughter," she said, introducing herself to Ruth. Ruth invited her in. Fenella sat down and went into detail, telling Ruth all that she had found out. She said how the boys had brought food, earned money for her mother, and encouraged what seemed like the whole village to help. Fenella then gave everyone a bit of a shock. "You know, my mother is very forgetful these days. I do encourage her to put things down on paper and make lists so that she can remember things, but she never does it. I live some way away, but Usually manage to see her every 2 weeks. I sort her out, get her a few things, and do a bit of cleaning. Fenella then turned to Jimmy, handing him back the little plastic bag containing the £6.25. You know, Jimmy, we just can't accept this money from you. It is the kindest thing I've ever known, but it would not be right for us to take it. My mum usually puts her purse in her handbag, but it seems this time she forgot to do so. Now, the big news is that I finally found it, and it was totally by accident. Jimmy, do you remember the mobility scooter? Jimmy nodded a yes. Well, on the back of it is a large bag. It looks like a sack. Mum uses it to put all her shopping in. I was fumbling around in it and suddenly I felt something familiar. It was Mum's purse. So, Jimmy, when you and Roger were pushing that scooter, you were less than inches away from it. Fenella laughed, and so did Ruth. But Jimmy simply said, Bother! If only he had looked in the bag, everybody would have been saved a good deal of effort. After a little chat with Ruth, Fenella got up to leave. She thanked Jimmy again and asked him to thank Roger too. Before she left, she had one more thing to say. Jimmy, please don't worry about my mother. She's got plenty of money and she won't ever starve. I'm always on the end of the phone if ever she wants anything. Now, there's something I want to show you. Can you come out to the car with me? Jimmy followed Fenella out of the house to her big shiny car. She went round to the back of it and opened the boot and pulled out a big box. What's in it? Jimmy asked. It's a little present for you to share with Roger. You know, I've 2 children and one of them is a boy. His name's Peter, but he's quite a lot older than you. I've been clearing out some of his toys because he's far too big for them now. I just thought you might like his electric train set. It's got 2 engines, carriages, and lots of railway track. Would you like it? Jimmy was stunned. He could hardly believe it. At first he just couldn't say anything because he was so excited. He finally managed to say, Golly! And then, golly again. He just couldn't wait to show Roger. That evening, when Jimmy's father had finished in the surgery and they were all sitting in the lounge, Ruth had something to say to Jimmy. Jimmy, I know it may be difficult for you, but I rather think you and Roger should give that £6.25 back to all the people who gave it to you. You see, they partly gave it because they thought Mrs. Davis had no money. But now we find that that's not the case. She's got plenty of money. Jimmy was a bit sad, especially as he and Roger had worked so hard for the money. But he agreed it had to go back. Roger also agreed. It didn't bother him so much because he and Jimmy now had a fantastic train set. So, next day, Jimmy and Roger went around all the cottages and houses where they had done jobs. They explained that Mrs. Davis hadn't lost her purse after all, and so they had come to give the money back. But they had a surprise. Nobody would take the money. Mrs. Pollock said it was because the boys had worked very hard in her garden. Mrs. Baker said it was because she had never before heard of 2 young boys doing such a kind thing. Then Mr. Jackson said it had done something very strange for the village. It had brought people together to help an old lady. It had shown how generous everyone could be, and this had made everyone feel very happy and much friendlier with each other. So, well done, Jimmy, and well done, Roger.